Okay, imagine a technology so powerful it could help feed a growing planet, making our crops stronger, more nutritious, and way more resilient. Now imagine that same technology is at the heart of a huge, decades-long global controversy. Well, that's the story of genetically modified crops. So let's break down the science, the controversy, and what it all really means for our future. At its core, the goal here is incredibly ambitious. We're talking about designing plants that can literally fight off pests on their own, that can survive a brutal drought, produce way more food on the same piece of land, and even be packed with extra nutrients. These aren't just minor tweaks. This is the whole reason scientists poured so much energy into this technology to begin with. So you have to ask, right? If the potential is that amazing, what's all the fuss about? With a list of benefits that impressive, why is there so much debate, so many restrictions, and frankly, so much public concern? To get that, we've got to look at the other side of the coin.
So here's our roadmap. We'll start by weighing that promise against the peril. Then, we're going to dig into the three big questions: the environmental impact, the debate over human health, and the economic power dynamics. And finally, we'll see how it all plays out in the real world.
First up, the big one, the environment. See, once you release a genetically modified organism into the wild, you can't exactly put the genie back in the bottle. So, what happens when these brand new traits start mixing it up with the wider ecosystem?
To really get the biggest environmental concern, we need to talk about something called horizontal gene transfer. And no, this isn't sci-fi, it's a totally natural process where genes can literally jump between different species. The real question is, what happens when we hit the fast forward button on that process with GM crops?
And that brings us right to the superweed debate. The main worry is that a gene for, say, herbicide resistance could jump from GM corn to a weedy cousin out in the wild. And bam, you've created a weed that's nearly impossible to kill. Now, this sort of thing does happen in nature, but it happens super slowly, giving the ecosystem time to adjust. Genetic engineering, on the other hand, speeds this up dramatically, and that could create problems way faster than we can cook up solutions.
And it's not just about weeds, it's about bugs too. A huge concern is that pests will just evolve. They'll develop resistance to the toxins in plants like Bt cotton, making the tech totally useless over time. Plus, there's the worry that these toxins might harm beneficial insects, like bees. But the solutions are pretty clever. And it's also really important to remember that the alternative, just spraying massive amounts of pesticides, is often way, way more damaging to everything else in the environment. So how do you fight evolution? Well, you have to get strategic. Here are the two main plays scientists and farmers are using to stay one step ahead. First, they plant what are called refuges. These are basically patches of non-GM crops where the non-resistant bugs can survive and breed, which helps dilute the resistance gene in the population. Second, they stack the genes. They engineer crops with multiple toxins because it's a lot harder for an insect to develop resistance to two different things at the same time.
The environmental questions are massive, for sure. But the debate doesn't just stop in the fields. It follows the food all the way to our plates. And that brings us to maybe the most personal question of all. Are genetically modified foods actually safe to eat?
Okay, so two big concerns have really driven this whole conversation: allergies and antibiotic resistance. And these were totally valid questions that needed serious answers. The allergy worry was that a new protein might trigger a reaction. Now, scientists screen these proteins against huge databases of known allergens. On the second point, to deal with the fear that antibiotic marker genes could jump to our gut bacteria, well, newer techniques have been developed to just remove those markers from the plant altogether. And really, when it comes to the scientific consensus, this statement from the World Health Organization, it's about as clear as it gets. After more than 2 decades and millions upon millions of people eating these foods, they've found no evidence of adverse health effects. All right, so if the science on health is pretty much settled and we have strategies to manage the environmental risks, what's left? Well, money and power. The debate moves out of the lab and into the boardroom. The question becomes, who actually owns and controls this powerful technology?
The whole answer boils down to something called intellectual property rights, or IPR. This is basically the legal framework that lets a company patent a gene or a modified seed, just like you'd patent a new smartphone. It gives them a temporary monopoly, letting them control who can use it and, of course, how much they have to pay for it.
And what's the result of that system? Well, take a look. By 2009, the market had consolidated in a huge way. Just 3 companies, Monsanto, DuPont, and Syngenta, controlled almost half of the entire global proprietary seed market.
That's a textbook oligopoly, where just a tiny handful of players call the shots for an entire industry. Now, to be fair, there are two sides to this. The justification is pretty straightforward. Without the promise of a patent, why would a company invest billions in R&D? It's their reward for all that innovation. But the flip side, the consequence, is that this system can lead to immense corporate control, much higher prices for farmers, and a real lack of competition in the marketplace.
And for the farmers on the ground, this impact is incredibly real. They're facing way higher seed costs. Bt cottonseed, for instance, can be 4 times more expensive than the old stuff. That means if a crop fails, their financial hit is that much bigger. And on top of all that, they live with the constant risk of being sued for patent infringement, even if a patented crop just accidentally blew over from a neighbor's field.
So let's pull all these different threads together. The environmental issues, the economic pressures, that incredible promise, and see how they actually played out in one of the biggest agricultural experiments in modern history, the introduction of Bt cotton in India.
Back in 2002, Bt cotton became the very first GM crop to get the green light for commercial farming in India, and this was a huge deal. It basically set the stage for a nationwide test of this technology's real-world impact.
And at first, the results were just staggering. For more than a decade, cultivation exploded. By the mid-2010s, India had become the second largest cotton producer on the entire planet. But then, around 2015, things started to shift. Cultivation actually started to decline as farmers began running into new, unexpected challenges.
So what happened? Well, the technology worked almost too well. It absolutely hammered the main pest it was designed to kill. But by doing that, it created what ecologists call an ecological niche. With the main bad guy out of the picture, secondary pests like the pink bollworm and whitefly suddenly had this wide-open field, and they moved right in, creating a whole new problem.
The story of Bt cotton in India just perfectly captures the entire dilemma. It's not some simple story of good or bad, success or failure. It's a cycle. You introduce a powerful solution, it creates incredible benefits, but nature is always adapting. And that adaptation creates new, even more complex challenges that demand the next round of solutions.
Which leaves us with this final, really crucial question. This isn't about being for or against GM crops anymore. That ship has sailed. The technology is here. The real question for us now is, how do we manage it? How do we take advantage of its incredible potential while also staying one step ahead of the complex environmental, economic, and social problems it creates? That, right there, is the challenge ahead.